For 26 years, my daughter Emma was the center of my world, the reason I woke up every morning and pushed through long, exhausting days. I still remember the day she was born, a cold October morning filled with rain tapping against the hospital windows. When the nurse placed her tiny body in my arms, her fingers wrapped around mine so tightly that I felt something shift inside my chest. In that moment, I made a promise that no matter what life threw at us, I would always protect her and give her the best life I possibly could. 6 years later, when her mother decided she didn't want the responsibility of raising a child and walked out of our lives with nothing but a quiet apology and a suitcase, that promise became the most important thing I had left. From that day forward, it was just Emma and me against the world. I worked mornings at a small auto repair shop and nights delivering parts just to keep the lights on and food on the table. I learned how to braid her hair from watching online tutorials because she loved wearing pigtails to school. I packed her lunches every morning, sometimes writing small notes inside the lunchbox telling her to have a great day. I sat at the kitchen table helping with math homework even when I barely understood the problems myself. When she had nightmares, she would run to my room and climb into bed beside me, and I would stay awake until she fell asleep again. I never complained because every smile she gave me made the struggle worth it. As she grew older, she became my greatest pride. She worked hard in school, graduated near the top of her class, and got accepted into a good university. I still remember standing in the crowd at her graduation ceremony, clapping so hard my hands hurt when they called her name. Afterward, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Dad, everything I am is because of you." Those words stayed with me for years. So when Emma called me one evening last winter with excitement bursting in her voice, telling me that her boyfriend Jason had proposed to her, I felt a wave of happiness so strong that it nearly brought tears to my eyes. I liked Jason well enough the few times we had met. He was confident, well-dressed, and came from a wealthy family that owned several businesses in the city. His parents lived in a large house with polished marble floors and paintings that probably cost more than my entire shop. I sometimes felt a little out of place around them, but Emma seemed happy and that was all that mattered to me. When the wedding planning began, I made one thing very clear to my daughter. I told her not to worry about the cost of anything because her father would take care of it. The venue deposit, the catering, the wedding dress that cost more than my first car, the flowers, the photographer, the live band, even the honeymoon suite at a luxury hotel. Every time a new bill arrived, I paid it with a quiet sense of pride, believing that I was helping give my daughter the perfect start to her new life. I imagined walking her down the aisle, placing her hand in Jason's, and seeing her smile the way she used to when she was a little girl. But 3 weeks before the wedding, on an ordinary morning that began with coffee and silence in my small kitchen, I opened my email and saw a message from Emma with the subject line "Wedding Update," and when I clicked it, expecting another planning detail or maybe a request for help, I read the short cold message only once before my hands started shaking. Because the words written there were something no father ever expects to see from his own daughter. "Dad, Jason's parents think it would be better if you don't attend the wedding. They're worried about the family image, but don't worry, we'll send you a live stream link so you can watch from home." The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, even before the sun had started to rise, and for a few seconds I forgot about the email until the memory returned like a dull weight pressing against my chest. My kitchen felt quieter than it ever had before as I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop again, half hoping that maybe Emma had written another message explaining that the first one had been a misunderstanding or a mistake sent in frustration. But the inbox remained silent, and the only thing waiting for me was the same message I had already read too many times. I stared at the screen for several minutes, rereading every sentence as if hidden between the words there might be some kind of explanation that would make it hurt less. There wasn't. The message was simple and painfully clear. Jason's parents didn't want me there, and my own daughter had decided that their comfort mattered more than my presence. I tried to imagine the conversation that must have happened behind closed doors. Maybe they had looked at my worn mechanic's jacket, the grease that never fully washed out from my hands, the small house I lived in, and decided I didn't fit into their version of a perfect wedding. Their world was one of expensive suits, country clubs, and carefully polished reputations, while mine was built on long hours, honest work, and quiet sacrifices. For years I had ignored the subtle looks and the polite but distant smiles Jason's parents gave me whenever we met. I told myself it didn't matter because Emma loved me, and that love was enough. But now I realized something that hurt far more than their judgment. Emma had chosen silence instead of standing up for me. She hadn't called to explain. She hadn't argued or defended me. She had simply sent an email like I was some distant acquaintance who could be politely uninvited. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, staring at the kitchen wall where an old photograph still hung. It showed Emma at 8 years old, wearing a bright yellow dress at her school play, holding a small trophy and smiling at the camera while I stood beside her looking exhausted but proud. For years I had believed that every sacrifice I made was building something unbreakable between us. Yet now it felt like all those years had been quietly erased with a few typed sentences. I stood up slowly and walked to my small office room where I kept financial papers from the repair shop. Inside a drawer was a folder labeled Emma's Wedding, thick with receipts and contracts that I had carefully organized during the past 6 months. I opened it and began laying the papers across the desk one by one. The venue contract sat on top, followed by the catering agreement, the photographer booking, the floral arrangements, the band reservation, the wedding planner's invoice, and the honeymoon suite confirmation. Each paper represented another piece of the celebration I had been so proud to help create. When I added the numbers together again, the total was almost $48,000, a sum that had taken years of savings and countless late nights at the shop to gather. I imagined the wedding day unfolding without me there, my daughter walking down the aisle while strangers toasted and celebrated inside a hall that my hard work had paid for, and the thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. For a long time I simply sat there in silence, staring at the pile of papers until a strange calm began to settle over me. The sadness was still there, heavy and undeniable, but underneath it another feeling slowly formed, something steadier and colder than anger. If I truly wasn't welcome at the wedding, then perhaps it was time for me to accept that reality completely. After all, a guest who isn't invited doesn't usually pay for the entire celebration. With that quiet realization guiding me, I reached for my phone, scrolled through the contact list until I found the number for the wedding venue, and pressed the call button while the morning sunlight finally began to appear through the window. Knowing that the conversation I was about to have would change everything about the wedding Emma thought she was going to have. 3 days after I made the first phone call, the consequences of my decision began to ripple outward in ways I knew would eventually reach Emma and everyone else involved in the wedding. The first call came from the wedding planner, a woman named Linda who had spent months organizing every detail of the ceremony with the kind of cheerful professionalism that made the entire event feel larger than life. Her voice sounded confused at first, almost polite, as she asked if there had been some kind of banking mistake regarding the venue payment. I leaned back in my chair at the repair shop, wiping grease from my hands with a rag while the sound of distant tools echoed in the garage. I told her calmly that there was no mistake at all and that I had personally requested the cancellation. There was a long pause on the line, followed by a sudden rush of panic in her voice as she explained that the wedding was only 2 weeks away and the venue had already begun final preparations for the event. I listened quietly while she spoke, then repeated the same sentence that had been forming in my mind since the morning I received Emma's email: if I wasn't invited to the wedding, then I had no reason to continue paying for it. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable, as if she didn't quite know how to respond to something so simple yet so final. After that call ended, the others started arriving one by one like dominoes falling in slow motion. The catering company contacted me next, asking why the scheduled payment had been reversed and whether the client still intended to host a dinner for more than 200 guests. I told them the booking had been canceled and that they were free to release the date to someone else. Later that afternoon the florist called, sounding almost desperate because they had already ordered thousands of dollars worth of roses and white orchids that Emma had carefully chosen during the planning meetings. I apologized for the inconvenience but explained that the order would not be needed anymore. By the time evening arrived, the photographer had also reached out, followed by the live band that had been hired to perform during the reception. Each conversation felt strangely similar, filled with confusion, urgency, and the same repeated explanation that the person responsible for the payments had withdrawn from the arrangement. I imagined the wedding planner's phone ringing nonstop as she tried to figure out how to repair a celebration that was slowly unraveling piece by piece. 2 days later, my own phone rang again, but this time the name on the screen made my chest tighten. It was Emma. I answered quietly, and for a moment neither of us spoke. When she finally did, her voice sounded shaky and strained, as if she had been crying. She asked me why the venue had been canceled and why every vendor was suddenly telling her that the contracts were no longer valid. I could hear panic behind her words, mixed with disbelief that the carefully planned wedding she had been dreaming about was collapsing just days before it was supposed to happen. Instead of answering right away, I asked her a question that had been sitting in my heart since the day her email arrived. I asked her why her own father had been told not to attend the wedding he was paying for. The silence that followed lasted longer this time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost ashamed. She admitted that Jason's parents had insisted it would look better if their family appeared to be the ones hosting the entire event. They believed it would protect their reputation and avoid awkward questions from their wealthy friends. Hearing those words confirmed what I had already suspected, but it didn't make the disappointment any easier to carry. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath before telling Emma that when she asked me not to come, I simply decided to respect her wishes completely, even if that meant stepping away from everything else connected to the wedding. The day that was supposed to be Emma's perfect wedding arrived quietly, almost strangely calm, and I spent the morning at home sitting in the same worn chair by the living room window where I had often watched her leave for school years ago with a backpack that looked almost bigger than she was. The house felt unusually silent, as if even the walls understood that something important was happening somewhere else without me. I tried to keep myself busy by fixing a broken cabinet hinge and sorting through old paperwork from the repair shop, but every so often my mind drifted back to the image I had once carried for years, walking my daughter down the aisle, seeing her smile proudly while guests applauded and music filled the room. That moment had lived in my imagination since she was a little girl playing pretend weddings in the backyard with a plastic flower crown and a blanket tied around her shoulders like a bridal veil. Now that moment belonged to someone else's version of the story. In the early afternoon, an email notification appeared on my phone. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Emma had promised that I would at least be able to watch the ceremony through a Livestream link, the digital compromise offered in place of my presence. For a while I ignored it, letting the message sit unopened while the afternoon sunlight slowly moved across the floor of the living room. Eventually, curiosity and something deeper than pride convinced me to tap the screen. The video loaded after a few seconds, revealing a small garden decorated with simple white chairs arranged in uneven rows beneath a wooden arch covered with a few scattered flowers. It was nothing like the grand ballroom Emma had originally chosen, nothing like the elegant event she had planned for months. There were fewer guests than expected, maybe 30 people at most, and the atmosphere felt tense rather than joyful. Jason stood near the front wearing a suit that looked slightly wrinkled, his expression stiff and irritated as he checked his watch more than once. His parents sat in the front row, their faces tight with frustration as if they were silently blaming someone for the way everything had turned out. Then Emma walked into view. She still looked beautiful, of course, wearing a simple white dress instead of the expensive gown we had once chosen together, but the brightness that usually filled her eyes seemed dimmed by exhaustion and worry. As the ceremony began, the officiant spoke about love, commitment, and the joining of two families, words that felt strangely hollow given everything that had happened. When it was time for the vows, Jason spoke first, delivering his promises quickly and nervously while glancing occasionally toward his parents. Then Emma took a step forward, holding the microphone with trembling hands. For a moment she didn't say anything, and the silence stretched long enough that several guests began whispering to each other. Finally she lifted her head and looked directly toward the camera that was streaming the ceremony. Her voice shook as she admitted that someone very important was missing from that moment. She said her father should have been standing beside her, not watching through a screen miles away. She confessed that she had allowed other people's opinions to influence her decision, and that fear of disappointing them had made her betray the one person who had never once failed her. As tears ran down her face, she spoke about the years of sacrifices I had made, the long nights working and the quiet ways I had always supported her dreams. Then she looked straight into the camera again and whispered a simple apology, hoping that wherever I was watching I might still hear her. Sitting alone in my living room, I felt a complicated mix of pain, relief, and something softer that slowly replaced the anger I had been carrying for weeks. Revenge, I realized in that quiet moment, was never truly about ruining someone's happiness. Sometimes it was simply about forcing the truth into the open so that people could finally see the weight of their choices.